Hello, and thank you for joining today's webinar, iOS 9, Redefine Mobile Collaboration and Control with Josh Lambert. My name is Kayla Heineman, and I'll be your moderator today. Now, real quick, just a few housekeeping items before we begin. If you've joined a webinar with us in the past, then you might notice that we have a new look. We are using the On24 webinar platform to enhance your webinar experience. The webinar console is completely customizable, so you can enlarge the slides and minimize the Q&A box, so we hope you take advantage and play around with your console. This webinar is expected to last about 60 minutes and is in listen-only mode. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, so if you have a question you'd like answered, please be sure to post it publicly in the Q&A box located on the left-hand side of your screen. Feel free to minimize this box if you'd like. You can access this by clicking the red Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We are recording today's session, and we'll make the link to the recording and slides available by email. So at this point, I'd like to pass it off to Josh Lambert, Mass 360's Product Manager, specializing in iOS devices, to kick it off. Josh?
All right. Thanks, Kayla. So as Kayla mentioned, we're going through and giving you a nice overview of iOS 9. We'll take you through some of the details of the release. Also talk about some of the end-user productivity features that your end users will find very compelling. We'll then also go into some of the key enterprise management features. These are the features that allow you to control iOS 9 devices and make sure users have what they need to have to be productive. And we'll then also go into a demo of how you can leverage some of these new iOS 9 features with an MDM tool like Mass 360 here. So let's go underway here and talk a little bit more about iOS 9 at a high level. So iOS 9 was released last week on the 16th. That is Wednesday. And so a lot of your users have probably already started upgrading. It is supported on a pretty broad range of devices, and in fact, it is the same set of supported devices as iOS 8. And so all devices that could run iOS 8 can also run iOS 9. And so that's great to see with no devices sort of being left behind, so to speak, on the upgrade list here. So it comes out to the iPhone 4S and above, essentially all of the iPads with the exception of the iPad 1, and then the last two iPod Touch generations. That's the 5th and 6th generations. There are a huge number of new features here on iOS 9, so we'll cover a couple here at a high level. We'll also dive into some really important ones a little bit later here. But some highlights is the improved Notes application. This lets you work with a broad range of attachments, whether it's a map, addresses, images, documents. These can all be imported into the Notes application. You can also do freehand drawing on this application as well. And so some really huge improvements here that you'll kind of see also being important a little later as well here on why that could be very helpful. Also important is some new changes to the keyboard and to really help you and your users work more quickly with text. So, for example, you can now two-hand touch on the keyboard, and that will let you change the keyboard into more of a trackpad type service like you have on your laptop to help you select and work with text more efficiently. Also available are some new keyboard shortcuts on the soft keyboard to cut, copy, paste, undo, redo on the iPad. So you can work more quickly with those options. Also available, of course, are new keyboard shortcuts, and this will be very important for the new iPad Pro that was just announced, which has an extra keyboard dock available to it. And so you can work more quickly with those as well here. And kind of going to the next feature is Siri, which has gotten some enhancements as well. And so previously you could search across some of the Apple-provided native applications, and, of course, any service that Siri integrated with, of which there are new ones in iOS 9. But I think the key enhancement here is that Siri can now also search inside of third-party applications. So it does take some support from the third-party application vendor side, but once they do that, they can actually mark some of their content as available to be searchable from Siri. So maybe you're building some enterprise applications for a knowledge-based type application, and now end users can search through that with Siri and the search controls and find that more quickly and then even jump directly into that portion of your application straight away. So some huge improvements here, although it will take some time for app developers to fully leverage that feature. Finally, as always, Apple has been continuously improving their Mail application. and they now support the new ActiveSync 16 protocol. That's supported on the newest of the Exchange servers, and there are some nice improvements available in that in the new protocol that Microsoft supports, like calendar attachments. And so now if you have coworkers who are sending you invitations and putting attachments directly in the invitations, you can now open those up on your iOS devices. So some nice improvements there to support the new changes in ActiveSync. Finally here, one key point on iOS 9 is that we do expect people to rapidly upgrade. Again, the device list is the same for supported devices as it was in iOS 8, so no one's being left behind. And also, there was, of course, some hurdles on the device space available for iOS 8, and Apple's done a great job in addressing that with only just over a gig required for iOS 9. That's almost a 25% decrease in what was required for iOS 8. So we do expect to see, again, a rapid adoption here, and so it's important to be prepared and ready for iOS 9 as your users will be upgrading. And in fact, in under a week, actually about 4 days or so, we ran some numbers, and we have seen well over 100,000 devices already upgraded on iOS 9 and running in the enterprise. So users are clearly very excited about the new features, and of course, we are too, and I think a lot of companies are as well. So with that, let's now move on to I think, the most important feature here in iOS 9, in particular for your employees who have iPads, really is the new multitasking features that are available. And it's kind of broken down into 3 separate parts. And they all kind of build on each other here. And so we're going to go through them step by step here. The first one is what's called slide over. And that allows you to quickly work with another application. And this is great for kind of interrupt-driven workflows or any time you need to sort of break out, do something quickly, and then return back to where you were before in your previous application. So, for example, if you get an iMessage, if your boss sends you a VIP email and you want to quickly respond, or perhaps, for example, you're composing an email and you want to book a meeting for tomorrow, you can quickly swipe in and open up your calendar and work with your calendar and then find a good time and then go back to your mail right where before and simply type in those time frames. So some great options here, and we'll give you a look at all these in just a second. This one does require some special hardware here, and so it does work on the Air and above, the Mini 2 and above, and the Pros. So keep that in mind as far as the hardware requirements, as of course you do have sort of 2 applications sort of running here, at least at the same time in this case. Kind of moving from that kind of slide over option where you can work with sort of one application on the side while your main application is paused is split view, and this really allows you to interact with both applications at the same time. And this really enables true sort of desktop, laptop class multitasking where you have multiple application windows open, you can interact with both, and you of course can also resize the screen. So how you get into here, and we'll show you this again, is you tap the little button next to the slide out window, and that becomes a full multiple application sort of divider, and you can resize that accordingly to like a third or a half. This does have additional hardware requirements above and beyond the slide over, right, because slide over does pause the main application, where a split view keeps both running at the same time. And so this does require the iPad Air 2, the upcoming Mini 4, or the Pro. But again, really powerful here, and going forward for devices supported, I think really unlocks a whole lot of new sort of workflow tasks, like for example, taking notes while you're perhaps researching some stuff in Safari and having both available at the same time. The final one is a picture-in-picture, which can really help to allow you to multitask while watching video content. So say, for example, you have a knowledge base article going or a new training video that you want folks to have. They can now watch that video, perhaps streamed from your knowledge base article in Safari. They can move that to a picture-in-picture overlay like you would see in a TV, and then perhaps also refer to some content, perhaps in Keynote or other services while they are kind of listening to your video or watching your video. So some nice options there for video watching and continuing to do other tasks. This one also has the same hardware requirements as slide over, and so it will be your Air Plus, Air and above, your Mini 2 and above, and your Pro. So let's give you a bit of a walkthrough on how this actually looks like in practice. So here I have my iPad, and I'm at the Manage360.com website, and I want to perhaps consider doing a demo here of Manage360 sometime tomorrow. So I'm going to go ahead and swipe to the right, And this now brings up that application tray where I can go through and launch another application inside this sort of side window here, or this slide over. And keep in mind that the main application window has now become darkened. That's because that application window has essentially become paused while we're working with this other application in the slide over mode. So I'll go ahead and launch the calendar application here. And as you can now see, I can now fully interact with my calendar application and book my 11 o'clock meeting for myself, reminder to go ahead and get started with MAS 360 here. And also keep in mind that the left-hand side, again, is paused and that application is sort of suspended for now. However, if I have compatible hardware, I can go into the full split view experience. And I can do that by tapping my finger on that white tray icon, so I can where it looks like I can kind of pull on the split view. And so if I tap there, I can enter into the full split view mode, which looks like this. So now I have both applications running simultaneously, and that white divider that was in place before between my calendar and Safari applications has now switched to a black divider, indicating that both are running. And you can see that Safari is no longer sort of grayed out or dimmed, if you will, signifying that both applications can be interacted with at the same time. So now I can go through, work on Safari, work on my calendar in parallel at the same time, and I can even also resize this. And so if I tap and drag on that divider, if you will, I can assign more space, for example, to my calendar application. And so now you can see that Safari and the calendar have both been allocated 50% of the available resolution and screen size of the iPad here, and both applications have now resized their content internally to fill the allotted space that makes sense to their application. And so that'll happen automatically as you continue to slide around the divider, and those applications will adjust accordingly to how much space you give them. And so that's a great overview of how you can go from one application, slide over another application, right, and get some kind of temporary work done while your main application is suspended, and then also shift into split view, which will let you work with two applications side by side at the same time. And so with that, let's go ahead and take a look at the final multitasking mode, which is picture-in-picture. Okay, so in this case, I have continued to work on Safari and started a video in Safari of a MAS 360 sort of educational video. And I have minimized Safari, but I have actually moved that video into a picture-in-picture overlay, and I can then continue to work on, say, for example, my calendar here. And so you can see some great opportunities for this, for example, for some perhaps knowledge-based websites that you have internally, where end users can go through, start a video, and then perhaps take some notes and some reminders for themselves of what they're learning in the video, or continue to do other jobs as functions as well, while they can still, of course, listen and also watch what's going on the video here. So some great options there for those types of workflows with picture-in-picture. And this brings us to our first poll question, which is essentially, have you updated to iOS 9 already? The first option is yes, you updated to iOS 9, and you in fact updated with the beta. And so we have seen quite a large number of folks internally here as customers who have gone ahead and started testing iOS 9 and could start taking advantage of some of the features early and testing how they'll work out in their environment, which of course we always love to see. The next option is, yes, you've updated, but you kind of updated with the GA version, right, that came out last week. And so, of course, that's great as well. You can take advantage of all those new features and start getting your feet wet with iOS 9. The final option is, you haven't updated yet, and you're still waiting for the rest of your company to go through, test, validate, and perhaps make sure that everything is go for iOS 9. And so I'll give you a few more seconds here to go ahead and complete and get your responses in. And with that poll question wrapped up here, we can now move into our kind of next section, which is focusing on those new management and control features that are available in iOS 9. Okay, and so we have broken this down into two sections here. The first one is the new policy settings and restrictions. These are the options you have to configure and control how the device behaves and what features and functions are available on the device for the end user. And the next section we'll talk about in just a minute is the new management features, or how you can push and pull applications on the device or work with programs such as VPP. So let's go ahead and dive in here to the new policy settings and restrictions. And these kind of fall into a few main buckets as far as the highlights go. And so let's get started with enterprise data security improvements. The first one here is some changes Apple has made in iOS 9 to how enterprise applications are trusted and ran. So enterprise applications are really the only way for applications to get on iOS devices that have not been reviewed by Apple. And intentionally, they are meant for employees of a company to get applications from their company to help do some work that are really meant for internal use only and not meant for the App Store. And so it's a great program, and we have companies who have upwards of 900 applications pushed out to the end users, again, in this sort of enterprise fashion. But there have been some other uses on the fringes around either malware or pirating applications that cost money, which have been kind of undesirable. And so with iOS 9 just out of the box, Apple has made it more difficult for end users to accidentally install and trust these. And furthermore, there's another control, again, new here, where you can actually completely prevent end users from even being able to install enterprise applications at all. And the only way that they can be installed is through an MDM solution like NAS 360. And that completely closes off any potential option for applications not from the App Store outside of your MDM solution. And so a great change there to help sort of get some additional controls around this enterprise applications. The next one is to ensure corporate data is not sent via AirDrop, and so that's pretty straightforward. And so applications that you push down as a company, you can opt to not have content from those applications shared via AirDrop. And we'll go into more details there in the demo a little bit later. Next up is really sort of a category of features that fall into sort of like a single-use or kiosk device improvement. And so these would be the devices where you have, in a retail store or an airport check-in line, or really any kind of place where you're giving a controlled experience to one of your customers or end users. And so because of that, you want to make sure there's a predefined and controlled way that they can interact with these devices. And so there's been some really nice improvements here to iOS 9 to support this. And the first one is the option to disable the App Store on the device and hide the icon, but still retain the management features to be able to push new applications down to that device. So previously, for folks who have been using iOS 9 or iOS for a while, you kind of knew you could disable that icon and hide it. But that took also with it was any option to continue to push new applications down. And so new in iOS 9 is the option to hide the App Store, but still retain that functionality, which is very important. The next set of options here are to really prevent the end user from changing certain aspects of the device, like the device name, the passcode, or the wallpapers on the lock screen, the home screen. And so if you customize those, you could do it before, but you couldn't really lock those down entirely from end users being able to modify them. And now with iOS 9, you can. And finally here, as far as sort of a big set of control features, is the option to help get some hands around your telecom costs, and in particular, how much data is used on cellular, as well as roaming while on cellular. And so with new features here in iOS 9, you can actually select which applications are allowed to use roaming data on cellular, and which ones are allowed to use just cellular in general, and then, of course, the remainder being only allowed to work on Wi-Fi. So some nice improvements here across some pretty key aspects of the enterprise experience for your users. And so let's move on to the new enterprise management capabilities that are present in iOS 9. And these really also help to derive those similar themes you saw earlier as well here. And so kind of the big, I would say, banner feature for me is the first one here, which is the new option to be able to deliver applications to devices without iTunes IDs. So previously, if you had some licenses or applications that you as an enterprise wanted to push out to your users, those had to be associated with an Apple ID on the device. And this meant that you had to have, of course, Apple IDs present, and that could prove problematic in kind of two different use cases that we found most common. The first one, again, is that sort of single-use or kiosk-type experience. So maybe it's a student, for example, or you're deploying some of these in your banking retail locations, and you didn't really want to have to worry about having Apple IDs on these devices in these sort of controlled use cases, right? Because it didn't really serve any purpose other than simply being there to act as the sort of rights management control for your applications. And so now with iOS 9, you can actually do away with those, not have to worry about them, not provision them, not get them configured, and simply rely upon the new device assignment here in iOS 9. And the same goes also for your sort of onboarding experience through the device enrollment program for, again, DEP-capable devices. And so if you're going to think of the user experience there, right, your end user gets the device out of the box, it's been configured for DEP, they unbox it, they power it on, and it then asks them to, sign into your company because it's a company device. And so they do that, they go through any wizard options which you've allowed them to configure, and then they're at the home screen. And before you could push any public applications to them, they had to enter in their Apple ID. And so go through, do that, create one if it wasn't there, and then they'd have to go in and associate their Apple ID to your VPP account. And so that was a lot of extra steps in the process that could potentially, perhaps confuse some users. And so now with this device assignment process, they go through that DEP setup experience, and when they're at the home screen, applications can start coming down automatically with no further interaction. And so it's a really nice sort of smoothened out experience, and of course end users can then go in later and configure the Apple ID if they so desire, but that initial setup experience and those core applications which you want to come down can do so without sort of being restricted by having the Apple ID be configured first. And so some great tools there for both of those use cases. Now, how this works is it does have some requirements. It does require VPP licenses, and that is what you're going to be assigning to the device as sort of making sure the device has the rights to use the application. And then it also requires the application developer to opt in to device assignment as well. And so they don't have to do this, but we expect most developers to do so, and we can, of course, determine in our product which ones have and which ones has not, and it can tell you that. So assuming both those are true, you have a VPP account and the applications you want to push are available for device assignment, you can then simply distribute those to your devices, and we'll give you a quick demo of how that's done on the admin console a little bit later. Building on top of this, of course, is some changes to the VPP program as well. And so with device assignment now requiring VPP, there have been some nice quality of life improvements to go along with that on the VPP side itself. So prior to iOS 9, if you had users in different countries, you had to have VPP accounts and VPP licenses in each of those countries. For example, if I'm in the United States and I buy licenses in my U.S. VPP account and try to give them to my Canadian users, those would fail because they weren't in the same region and the same store. And that could be a challenge if you are a multinational corporation with operations in a number of places. And so you had to manage, of course, a pretty wide variety of different VPP accounts and licenses accordingly. Now with iOS 9, that all goes away. And if you have a VPP license in one country, that license can be used in any other country so long as the application is available in that country's store. That's the only requirement. And by and large, we find most applications available globally in the iTunes Store. And so we don't expect that to be a problem for most of your applications. And so essentially, right, you can now use these VPP licenses anywhere in the world and without having that overhead of managing the per country and matching up the user's ID to the license ID. And so some really nice quality of life improvements here for people who were working with VPP accounts in the past. And of course, you'll be very excited for this feature to come available. Two other key features here on the management capability side of iOS 9. are also the option to ensure core applications are managed, as well as some new OS update controls. So some pretty compelling features here as well. So on the management application side, previously, if you've been working with MDM solutions and iOS, you might be familiar with the concept of managed apps. Managed apps are really applications that you have pushed down through your MDM solution, and of course that then gives you more control over those corporate-owned applications. And applications, of course, that the end user picked up perhaps from the iTunes store would be personally installed, and you do not have the same level of control over them. And so that could potentially cause a problem if, for example, your end user may have knew they wanted a VPN client and had gotten it from the iTunes store before looking into your enterprise application store and got the managed version of it. And so prior to that, for users to sort of correct this problem and to make sure that your users had a managed version application to make sure you can, for example, configure it, you'd have to tell them to go ahead and delete the application, which remove the user's data as well, and then go get it again from the company app store. Now with iOS 9, those requirements are gone. And if a user has an unmanaged copy of an application which you were trying to push them, they'll now get prompted on unsupervised devices to agree to have it managed. And if they agree, it becomes managed and all the application's data persists and is no longer removed. And so a great improvement to the end user experience there to help address potentially a confusing area of managed versus unmanaged applications that particularly end users probably weren't aware of. And even better on supervised devices, right, those kind of company-owned ones through DEP, for example, won't even prompt the user at all. It will just be completely silent. Now, as far as updates go, right, they're very important for iOS. And this is because iOS updates are essentially the chief way that bugs get addressed, as well as any kind of security issues as well. And so it becomes very important to make sure that your users are running the latest available version that they can. And so with iOS 9, there's some new controls here to help make sure your end users are running the most secure and most recent versions of iOS. And so you'll be able to go ahead and once users are on iOS 9 and that there are new upgrades available to future versions, perhaps 9.01 or 9.1, for example, you can go ahead and trigger those updates to users to help make sure, again, that they stay up to date with the best and greatest version of iOS that is available. Now, of course, since you are triggering updates here, this does have some requirements, and it does require DEP-enrolled supervised devices. And so that's to make sure, of course, that before you start upgrading end users' devices, that these are devices that you as a company own and therefore have the rights to make sure that they stay up to date. So some great new features there to both help address the user experience on that kind of nuanced managed and unmanaged applications, as well as, again, making sure your end users are as secure as possible. And with that, we are now on our final poll question of our webinar today, and that is, which management feature are you most looking forward to in iOS 9? Is it the ability to push applications down to your end user devices without requiring an Apple ID? Is it the option to, again, ensure your devices are up to date on the latest and greatest version of iOS? Or is it the new changes to the VPP licenses such that any country and any account can now redeem them and use them without worrying about matching up the Apple ID's country to the VPP licenses country? So go ahead and give you a few seconds to get those answers in, and we can then move on here. Okay, so with that poll question wrapped up here, we are on to leveraging iOS 9 with MAS 360. All right, so we kind of talked about a lot of the new and great features and benefits of iOS 9, and so now we'd like to kind of give you an example of how those might work with an MDM solution, and of course in this case MAS 360. So let's go ahead and jump into a demo here. We'll switch over to our browser and go ahead and get logged into MAS 360. All right, so here we are logging into MAS 360. Take just a second here to get logged in. and we can start working through some of the things we talked about earlier. So let's first go ahead and take a look at some of those restrictions and new controls that are available in iOS 9. So we expose those through what we call policies here. So we'll go ahead and take a look at those. It's going to be an iOS policy, of course. And the majority of the new settings in iOS 9 are really under the restrictions side. And those are things where you can go ahead and, again, enable or disable certain features of the phone for your users. So we'll go ahead and take a look at those here. We have broken those down into settings that require what's called supervised mode and settings that don't. Supervised mode are all down below in this section here, and those require the device to be supervised either by Apple Configurator or through the device enrollment program. That's kind of how Apple signifies a corporate-owned device, and they can let you take advantage of more sort of hardening or kind of more intrusive controls than you would normally want to have on a BYOD or personally owned device. So let's go through and talk about some of the unsupervised settings here. And there are just a few, and kind of one of the big ones here is AirDrop for managed applications. So you can see here it's got tagged for iOS 9. That way you know that it's only available for iOS 9 and above devices. So AirDrop for managed apps allows you to prevent AirDrop from being used with applications that you, as IT, have deployed. And so this is a great feature. So personally installed applications are free to use AirDrop for sharing pictures, contact information, and things like that. But for corporately distributed applications and accounts, those cannot be shared with AirDrop. So a great enhancement there for those of you who perhaps are concerned about this particular feature and your corporate data. The next kind of other area for the unsupervised restrictions is iCloud Photo Library. So here you can go through and disable this feature if you're concerned about photos being taken from this device and then potentially uploaded to the Apple ID's iCloud account that's on the device. And so you can turn that off. You, of course, do see some caveats here to make sure that the photos have completely synced before turning that off for a user. So that's kind of some of the highlights there of the unsupervised side. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these supervised settings, which is really where a lot of the more interesting ones that are available in iOS 9. So these are towards the bottom here. You can see a nice selection of iOS 9 options here. And the first one, it really is an important one that I think a lot of folks are looking for, in particular for that DEP or that kiosk type use case or single-use device that we kind of talked about earlier in the presentation here. And what this allows you to do is to disable the App Store or really hide it from the user of the device, but still retain full control over application pushing and pulling. So previously, prior to iOS 9, you could turn off the App Store, but that also took with it any application management capabilities. So this new option here in iOS 9 allows you to do the same feature of hiding the App Store from the end user, but retaining the ability to push applications down. So really important here for a lot of, again, kiosk devices where you're giving a device out to an end user, and you want to be able to perhaps push down applications maybe a month from now, 2 months from now to extend the functionality of that, but not allow end users to go to the App Store and potentially download things on their own. So that kind of control experience, this is really great for. Again, further on down here, that allow keyboard shortcuts and some modifications you can see as well, right? So passcode, device name, wallpaper. As we discussed earlier, those previously could be set, but the end user could override them. And now with these controls here for supervised devices, you can prevent those. And again, the last one down below is that trust for enterprise applications, where you can go in and really, prevent entirely the end user from installing any enterprise applications that did not come from your MDM solution like Mass 360 here. So pretty straightforward, pretty easy. You can kind of see which ones are iOS 9. Simply check the box and then click on Publish up top, and you can roll out those changes to your users. And for those of you with Mass 360 today, all of these are available for you. If you're kind of in and around policies for the last couple of weeks, actually, you would have seen these. They were available for a lot of the beta testing that was going on, right, for those public betas for the end users to help them, get a sense of what's coming, and they can try and test out some of these restrictions as well before the launch. So it's kind of a summary there of some of those security and control options. And with that, let's move over to the application management feature. So the key one here is, of course, device-based assignment. And as you mentioned, there are two options here, right, for applications currently to either opt in or opt out of device assignment. And the default, currently is opt out, right, so they have to opt into it. And so right now the Apple applications are all opted in, for example, and other developers will be opting in over time goes on, and expect that, of course, to just continue to ramp up as more folks are aware of this feature and how important it is to enterprises. So let's take a look at Microsoft PowerPoint here. You can see I have 100 licenses for this already purchased, and I can go ahead and click on Distribute. And you'll see in this case that this application has already been available for device assignment as well. So I can go in and I can control whether it's user or device here and push accordingly. Right? So by default, for applications that have not enabled device assignment, you can go in and, of course, pick user. That will be the default. And for ones that do, you'll see this new option here for device assignment show up. And again, this one will, of course, be targeted towards the Apple ID. We'll have the user experience that those of you who have MDM platforms have been familiar with so far. But if you, of course, pick device assignment, that will then assign the license to the device serial number, and you'll no longer require any Apple ID on the device for this push to go through. And from there, of course, you can go ahead and pick all devices. Simply click on Distribute here, and that will then start rolling out to our end users. And again, the same thing, of course, you can go through and look at the Apple Store, for example, and push that out as well. In this case, perhaps we can go through and push out an instant install version. And with instant install, what that does is it will actually go ahead and push it out to devices without them having to take any action. And for, again, devices that perhaps don't have Apple ID, right, you can now do these with no association or other activity required on the device. So we'll go ahead and enter in our password. This will go through and push. And then once that starts to be assigned, you can go ahead and take a look at some of these licenses and then determine which ones are assigned, unassigned, and otherwise being utilized. So you can see in this case, we have one application yet to install it. That's my one device I'm pushing to now. And we have quite a large number of licenses still ready to be utilized. So very straightforward here, very simple. You can simply check on the device assignment box and utilize that going forward for applications that have made themselves available for device assignment. So, of course, the VPP changes are also in here as well. That's a little harder to demo, of course, in the admin console, as it instead just works from the one country to other countries as well. And so we have removed the checks in Mass 360 that previously were in place to make sure that you were using the proper VPPA account and codes for an account of the end user. And so those have all been removed, and now you are free to leverage any country's licenses with any country's Apple IDs. And so nice option there for, again, really kind of a nice quality improvement for those admins who are dealing with VPP codes. And so that's kind of it for the demo here, pretty quick. And again, take advantage of those controls. There are some really exciting new ones, especially if you're one of those customers and companies out there doing kind of kiosk experiences. There's some great enhancements there and some great benefits. And device assignment, of course, only builds on that in conjunction with the VPP changes as well. So really nice package to, in particular, not just impact your usual employees, but also those kind of single use. So we hope you enjoyed that tour of Maz 360 and some of the new iOS 9 features that you'll take advantage of, and kind of an idea of how that might look in an MDM solution when taking advantage of these features. Again, the policies and settings are all available today, And so if you've poken around, again, you'll probably have seen those. And the other new features like device assignment and international VPP will be coming in just a couple of weeks here. And so we're all excited to get those out for you and be able to let you try them. So with that, let's go ahead and talk a bit more about kind of just in general sort of the iOS upgrade preparation, right? So it's always a good time when a new version comes out to talk about some best practices here around what you might want to do, maybe not for iOS 9 if you've already done some of these, but maybe keep in the back of your mind here for when iOS 10, for example, comes out potentially next year here. So kind of first off, and this is probably pretty obvious, which is be prepared and test with the betas. If you have a developer account, right, betas are available starting during WWDC, and so it's a really good idea to go ahead and start testing, especially your enterprise applications, and making sure that they still work. And if you don't have a developer account, kind of new this year is that option to have that public beta, and it was pretty early. It came out in July, and so you have plenty of time to go ahead, update some test devices, and go ahead and try your really kind of common workflows. And so definitely go ahead and leverage those. And if you didn't have a developer account before, keep in mind you still can test now with that public beta service. And so take advantage of it. As far as now what to test, again, really important here, of course, is any internally developed applications, because you will be the only person to test them. And so there'll be no one kind of working on them otherwise. And so definitely make sure those are ready to go. As sometimes, depending on how you build your application, there could be some tweaks you have to build. Next up from there, of course, is to go through and make sure you test your services like VPN, your mail, and also don't forget any kind of custom scripting, right? Because sometimes some of the network behavior might change, some of the identifiers that you are using on your scripting might change, as well as, of course, also Apple continues to improve mail client. And so, bang on that and make sure that everything's working in your environment for the services and not just the applications that your users are using. And so check those off, of course, and go through the list. Finally, if you do find something on sort of those services side, right, make sure you raise the issue with your vendors. Chances are they already know about it, but they might not. And so let them know, and hopefully they can tell you what their plan is to address it and fix it and be ready for iOS 9 when it comes out. Finally here, on the third step, is actually pretty important, right? So you've gone through, you've tested the betas, and you kind of know what actions might be required or none. And so the important part here is to go through and make sure your employees know. So maybe, for example, they have to update a VPN application before it works completely with iOS 9, right? And so just let them know, for example, hey, we've gone through, we've tested it. You'll be great on iOS 9. Just make sure you go into the App Store and update, these two things. Or, make sure you go ahead and just do this one thing, or perhaps nothing, right? Maybe you're all set and everything was great, and just simply upgrade away, right? So just, tell your users what to expect, and really the goal here is to make sure that they know what's going on, and of course also can help save your help desk from unnecessary calls. Because even if everything is good, and you don't communicate to your users, they might call your help desk and simply ask, hey, this is an important part of my job. Can I upgrade to my iOS 9? I want to use some of the new features, like multitasking perhaps. And your help desk may not want to address those on a one-by-one basis. Finally, and I think most important here, especially for those of you who are developing internal applications, is to really pay attention to the guidance from WWDC. For example, multitasking, right? Multitasking requires the application to be able to automatically resize itself, whether it's a quarter of the screen, half the screen, or all the screen. And that can change at any point in time of the application's lifecycle. And so it's really important, for example, the application uses auto layout and size classes. So even though while multitasking is new this year, those two features are not new to iOS 9. And so Apple was trying to educate people during the developer conference to make sure that they build their application to support these. And there were reasons to do so at the time, like supporting the various screen dimensions of the devices that are coming out. And so if you supported these, you can more easily adapt to new and different size hardware, right? And that's always, of course, a good thing. But, of course, what they didn't tell you is that in iOS 9, they had planned for this new multitasking feature, and it will require these two features. And so, again, pay attention to this And with iOS 9, look and see what Apple is recommending to do as far as best practices, and start moving towards those. And that way, when iOS 10 comes out, you'll be better positioned to have your application just work with no changes required, especially for new features, if you sort of stay on the best practice, up-to-date type developer solutions here. And so that can be very important here, as it can help you save your developers some time if they stay up to date on the best practices. And with that, we can go ahead and move into questions.
Okay,
all right, so we got a couple of questions.
Sorry, Josh, didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to say great presentation and remind everybody on the call to submit their questions through the Q&A box, because we'll be devoting the rest of the time here to questions.
Yep, thanks, Kayla. And we got a couple coming in already, which is great to see. So we can start, go ahead and answer these. The first one is a question around if the NAS 360 application itself can be converted from unmanaged to managed. The answer is yes. So any application that's on the device can be converted. And the only thing to keep in mind there is that if it's an unsupervised device, you usually be prompted to agree to it being managed. And if it's supervised, there will be no prompt. But absolutely, any application on the device can be converted. Next question, and this is actually a couple around this topic, is the question with the new iOS update sort of capabilities. Is there any ability to prevent devices from installing future updates? Now, the answer there is no. The intent of the feature is to help users upgrade to the latest versions rather than holding the users back from new versions. So there's no way to prevent users from upgrading at this time. Another related feature we had was sort of how the updates work. And so what happens is through your MDM console, you'll be able to start the download of an update and then tell the device to try and install it as soon as possible. And that will, of course, depend upon there being enough space on the device being unlocked, and things like that. Again, you can kind of, again, kick those off and not hold users back. A question around the kind of backup of data to iCloud, and in particular photos, and so kind of what controls there are around them. And the answer there is that there are some individual controls. So you do have the ability to control, in this case in iOS 9 that's new, is iCloud photo backup. And so you can prevent the device from downloading new photos and uploading new photos to iCloud. And there also are separate controls for managed applications backing up data, as well as another control for the device backup process as well. And so those are all individual, and you have control over how those work. Got a couple other questions here coming through. One is a question on when device assignment will be available. And so for customers of NAS 360, that will be available in middle of October, too, is what we're currently shooting for. So that's when we're kind of targeting that release with that feature there. A couple other questions are coming in as well. Does the device assignment require iOS 9? So that will require iOS 9. It's a new feature of the new release, and so it will not work on previous devices. Another question, actually a couple looks like coming in around supervised devices and kind of how they become supervised. So certainly there are other benefits to having devices being supervised. And the two most common ways that works is to either use the Apple Configurator tool,
where you can supervise devices via USB. It does wipe them in the process. Just keep that in mind. And then the other way is to have devices enroll the device enrollment program. And so if you have that enabled, you of course can have those devices automatically be supervised when the user walks through the activation wizard. Also some questions around sort of background applications and if there's ways for applications to kind of run continuously in the background. The answer there is no. There's still no support for sort of like a persistent, running application that runs all the time in the background. And so the answer there is that there's been no changes to those features in iOS 9. So we're getting a couple other questions around kind of VPP and DEP in general and how you get going with those. So to get going with those, you'll first, of course, need VPP and DEP accounts. These are accounts with Apple. And the best place to go ahead and get started there is by going to deploy, deploy.apple.com. And you can start the process to getting your DEP and VPP accounts. And you can go ahead and pick which ones you want or turn them all on, again, up to you. And there's a bit of a process to go through as far as, proving who you are and things like that, in particular for DEP. Got one more question, looks like from a developer or a company developing applications, kind of wondering if there's anything they need to do with our iOS 9 applications to let them play with the new iOS 9 controls. And so the answer there is no. So all these controls that are enforced by the iOS operating system apply across all applications. And so there's nothing you have to do to sort of have your devices play with these things and be available. So in that respect, you're all set, ready to go. And with that, I think we're all out of questions. Kayla, unless you saw any, but I think we kind of went through most of them here.
Yeah, I think that about covers it. So thank you, everyone, for submitting your questions. I just wanted to remind you that we will be sending out an email that will provide you access to the recording and slides for today's event. That way you can review anything you missed or share it with others. So on behalf of myself and Josh and the rest of us here at IBM, we hope you enjoyed today's presentation and have a productive and secure rest of your day. Thanks again.